The rain poured heavily as Grace knelt beside her husband's freshly covered grave, unable to believe that the love of her life was gone. Only 3 days earlier, Daniel had been laughing with their children, promising to take them to the market after harvest. Now, all that remained was a mound of red earth and a wooden cross. Grace clutched the hands of her 3 children as tears streamed down her face. "Papa will come back, won't he?" little David whispered, his innocent eyes searching hers for hope. Grace swallowed the lump in her throat and forced a trembling smile. "No, my son," she whispered softly, "but he'll always watch over us." She had no idea how true those words would become. As the mourner slowly drifted away, Grace noticed something unsettling. Her mother-in-law, Mama Agnes, stood with folded arms, whispering to Daniel's 2 older brothers. Every now and then, the 3 of them glanced toward Grace with expressions colder than the rain falling from the sky. Grace's heart sank. She had always tried to be a good wife and daughter-in-law. She respected the family traditions, cared for Daniel's parents whenever they visited, and never argued, even when they treated her unfairly. Still, something about the way they looked at her that day sent a chill through her body. That evening, after returning home from the burial, Grace was helping the children settle down when loud knocks shook the front door. Bang, bang, bang. She opened it to find Mama Agnes standing outside with Daniel's brothers Victor and Samuel. Their faces carried no trace of sympathy. Without greeting her, Mama Agnes stepped inside as though she owned the house. "Pack your things," she said. Grace blinked in confusion. "Mother, what do you mean? This house belongs to our family." Grace stared at her in disbelief. "But Daniel built this house for us. My children were born here." Victor laughed bitterly. "You have no rights here anymore." Samuel nodded. "Our brother is dead. Everything he owned now belongs to his family." Grace's voice trembled. "I am his family." For a brief moment, silence filled the room. Then Mama Agnes pointed toward the door. "You are only a woman who married into this family. Leave." Little David ran toward his mother and wrapped his tiny arms around her leg. "Please don't send us away," he cried. The older children began sobbing. Grace fell to her knees. "Please, at least allow the children to stay until I find somewhere else." Mama Agnes looked away without emotion. "No." The brothers immediately began dragging furniture toward the door. Grace screamed as they threw mattresses, cooking pots, clothes, and family photographs into the muddy compound. Neighbors gathered outside. Some watched in silence, others quietly wiped away tears. No one dared challenge Mama Agnes. Everyone knew her influence in the village. Grace stood frozen as the only home her children had ever known was emptied before their eyes. Then, Victor walked into the bedroom one last time. He returned carrying a small wooden box that belonged to Daniel. Grace rushed forward. "No, please, that's my husband's." Victor held it out of her reach. "It belongs to the family." Before she could stop him, he walked away with it. Grace collapsed onto the wet ground. Her children cried around her as thunder echoed across the dark sky. Just then, an elderly neighbor named Mama Ruth slowly approached. She removed her wrapper and gently placed it over Grace's shoulders. "My daughter, come with me tonight." Grace looked up through tear-filled eyes. "I have nothing left." Mama Ruth squeezed her hand. "As long as you have breath, God is not finished with your story." Those words became the only light in Grace's darkest night. As they gathered the few belongings the brothers had ignored, Grace noticed something lying half-buried in the mud. It was Daniel's old Bible. She hugged it tightly against her chest. Inside the front cover, written in Daniel's handwriting, were the words, "Grace, if you are reading this one day, never lose hope. The truth always finds its way into the light." Grace frowned. What truth? Before she could think further, Mama Ruth urged her to leave. The children followed quietly as they disappeared into the rainy night. From the doorway of the house, Mama Agnes watched them leave with a smile. "She'll never recover from this," she muttered. But hidden deep inside the worn Bible was something no one had discovered. Something Daniel had kept secret. Something that would one day change Grace's life forever. And when that secret finally came to light, the very people who threw her into the rain would wish they had shown her mercy. Grace barely slept that night.
The small room Mama Ruth had offered was no bigger than a storage shed. Yet, it became a palace compared to the cold rain her children had escaped. She spent most of the night staring at Daniel's old Bible, replaying the words he had written inside. Grace, if you are reading this one day, never lose hope. The truth always finds its way into the light. She traced the handwriting with trembling fingers. What truth, Daniel? She whispered. What were you trying to tell me? There was no answer. Only the distant sound of crickets and the soft breathing of her children sleeping on a thin mat. As dawn broke, Grace quietly rose to prepare breakfast. She searched through the small bag of belongings they had rescued, hoping to find a little food. There was nothing. Not even enough gari to feed the children. Her heart sank. Just then, Mama Ruth walked in carrying a tray with steaming pap and akara. I know it's not much, she said, with a warm smile, but no child should wake up hungry. Grace burst into tears. You've already done too much for us. Mama Ruth gently held her shoulders. No, my daughter. One day, when God blesses you again, help someone else. That is how kindness continues. Those words stayed with Grace. After breakfast, she left the children with Mama Ruth and began searching for work in the nearby town. Hour after hour, she walked beneath the scorching sun. She knocked on restaurant doors. She visited market stalls. She even offered to wash clothes and clean houses. Everywhere she went, the answer was the same. We're not hiring. I'm sorry. Come back another time. By evening, her feet ached and her stomach growled with hunger. Still, she refused to return empty-handed. At the edge of the market, she noticed an elderly woman struggling to lift a heavy basket of tomatoes. Without hesitation, Grace rushed over. Let me help you. The woman smiled gratefully. Thank you, my daughter. Grace carried the basket all the way to the woman's stall. As she turned to leave, the woman stopped her. I've been watching you all day. You asked everyone for work, but never begged for money. That tells me the kind of person you are. She reached into her pocket and handed Grace a small amount of cash. It's not charity, the woman said before Grace could refuse. It's payments for your help. Grace accepted it with tears in her eyes. For the first time since Daniel's death, she bought food with money she had earned herself. That evening, her children smiled as they shared a simple meal. To Grace, it tasted like a feast. Meanwhile, back in Daniel's family home, things were far from peaceful. Victor and Samuel searched every corner of the house. They emptied drawers, opened cupboards, even lifted the floor mats. Mama Agnes watched impatiently. Have you found it? She asked. Victor slammed a cupboard shut. No. Samuel frowned. Daniel must have hidden it somewhere else. Mama Agnes clenched her fists. We know he planned something before he died. Find those documents before someone else does. None of them noticed that little Esther, Grace's eldest daughter, had secretly overheard this conversation before they were forced out of the house. That night, Esther quietly approached her mother. Mommy, Grace looked up. Yes, my dear. I remembered something. Grace listened carefully. The day Daddy came back from the city, he locked himself in the bedroom with a man wearing a black suit. Grace's heart skipped a beat. A man in a black suit? Esther nodded. They talked for a long time. Before the man left, Daddy hugged him and said, if anything happens to me, Grace will know when the time is right. Grace felt chills run down her spine. Why had Daniel never mentioned this? Who was that man? Before she could ask more questions, someone knocked on Mama Ruth's door. Knock, knock, knock. Everyone froze. It was already late. Mama Ruth carefully opened the door. Standing outside was a young man carrying a leather briefcase. Good evening, he said politely. My name is Peter. He looked directly at Grace. I don't believe we've met, she frowned respectfully. No, but I knew your husband. The room fell silent. Grace's heart pounded. Peter slowly opened his briefcase and pulled out a sealed brown envelope. Across the front, written in Daniel's unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "To be opened by my wife Grace, and no one else." Grace's hands began to shake. After everything she had endured, could this envelope contain the truth Daniel had promised would one day come to light?
The room fell silent. Grace stared at the brown envelope as if it held the answers to every question that had haunted her since Daniel's death. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it. Peter gently stopped her. "Before you open it, there's something your husband asked me to tell you." Grace looked up confused. "You knew Daniel?" Peter nodded. "For nearly 7 years, I was his legal assistant. He trusted me with something very important." Mama Ruth exchanged surprised glances with Grace. "Legal assistant?" she whispered. Peter took a deep breath. "Your husband wasn't just preparing for the future. He was preparing to protect you." Grace's heartbeat quickened. "What do you mean?" Peter sat down slowly. "About 2 years ago, Daniel came to our office. He told us he loved his family deeply, but he feared that if anything ever happened to him, some relatives would try to take everything from you." Grace felt tears welling in her eyes. Daniel had seen it coming. "He said," Peter continued softly, "if I die before my time, my wife will need protection, not pity." The room became so quiet that even the ticking wall clock seemed loud. Peter handed Grace the envelope. "This is yours." With trembling hands, Grace carefully broke the seal. Inside were several neatly folded documents and a handwritten letter. She unfolded the letter first. "My dearest Grace, if you are reading this, then the future I feared has become reality. I prayed it never would." Tears blurred Grace's vision. "Forgive me for keeping this from you. I wanted to tell you many times, but I feared that if anyone discovered my plans, they might try to stop them." Grace covered her mouth. Mama Ruth quietly wiped away her own tears. Peter remained silent. "You once asked me why I travel to the city so often. The truth is, I wasn't only buying farming equipment, I was investing our savings little by little into a business partnership with my closest friend, Michael." Grace frowned. Michael. She remembered the cheerful man who had visited them years earlier. Today, that business has grown beyond anything we imagined. Grace's eyes widened. "My share belongs entirely to you and our children." She looked at Peter in disbelief. "Business?" Peter smiled gently. "Your husband owned 35% of one of the fastest growing agricultural processing companies in the state." Grace couldn't speak. She had spent days worrying about feeding her children, yet Daniel had quietly built something that could change their lives forever. Peter placed another document on the table. "There's more." Grace unfolded it. It was a certified ownership document bearing Daniel's name. Attached to it was a legal declaration transferring his entire share to Grace and their children. "The transfer was completed 6 months before Daniel passed," Peter explained. "He made sure no one could legally take it from you." Grace burst into tears. Even after death, Daniel had still found a way to protect his family. Just then, Peter's expression became serious. "However," Grace looked up, "there's one problem." Her heart sank again. "What problem?" Peter sighed. "Someone has already tried to claim Daniel's ownership." The room froze. "What?" Peter nodded. 3 days after his burial, 2 men came to our office claiming to represent Daniel's family. Grace's breathing became uneven. "Victor and Samuel?" Peter nodded. "They insisted Daniel died without a wife who had any legal rights." Mama Ruth gasped. "They lied? They even brought witnesses." Grace's hands tightened into fists. Peter continued. "They demanded that all Daniel's business assets be transferred to them." Grace felt anger rising inside her. "What happened?" Peter smiled gently. "I asked them one simple question." He paused. "Where is Daniel's wife?" They claimed they didn't know. Peter reached into his briefcase and removed another envelope. "I already had copies of Daniel's legal instructions." He smiled, so I politely showed them the door. Mama Ruth laughed for the first time in days. "They must have been furious." Peter chuckled. "You should have seen their faces." Grace smiled through her tears. For the first time since Daniel's death, she felt hope.
But Peter wasn't finished. "Grace, there's one final instruction your husband left." She looked at him expectantly. "What is it?" Peter slowly removed a small brass key from his briefcase. "Daniel instructed us to give this to you only after confirming you are safe." "What's inside?" Peter's voice became quiet. "I honestly don't know. He never told us. He simply said," Peter repeated Daniel's exact words, "the final truth is waiting inside." Grace looked down at the tiny key resting in her palm. Her heart raced. What else could Daniel have hidden? Before anyone could speak again, Peter's phone rang. He answered. Within seconds, the color drained from his face. "What is it?" Grace asked. Peter lowered the phone. His voice was barely above a whisper. "They know." Grace found. "Who?" "Victor and Samuel. Someone from the office overheard today's meeting." Peter looked towards the window. "They are already on their way here." Outside, a vehicle pulled into Mama Ruth's compound. Several car doors slammed shut. Heavy footsteps echoed towards the house. Then, bang, bang, bang! Someone pounded on the door with terrifying force. Mama Agnes's angry voice rang through the night. "Grace, we know you are in here. Open this door, now!" The pounding on the door grew louder. Bang, bang, bang! "Grace," Mama Agnes shouted, "open this door before we break it down." Inside the small room, Grace instinctively drew her children close. Little David clung to her waist, his tiny body trembling. "Mommy, I'm scared." Grace gently stroked his hair, fighting to remain calm. "It's going to be all right," she whispered. "We're together." Peter stepped forward with quiet confidence. "You don't have to face them alone anymore." He nodded to Mama Ruth before walking to the door. The moment it opened, Victor and Samuel forced their way inside, with Mama Agnes following close behind. Their eyes immediately landed on the documents spread across the table. "So it's true," Victor sneered. "You found the lawyer." Peter met his gaze without flinching. "I didn't need to be found. I came looking for Grace." Samuel jabbed a finger toward the papers. "Everything Daniel owned belongs to this family." Peter calmly picked up one of the documents. "No, it belongs to Daniel's wife and children." Mama Agnes folded her arms and laughed. "Ha! Who is going to believe that?" Without saying another word, Peter removed his official identification card. "I represent the law firm that handled Daniel's estate." The confidence on their faces faded. Every document was signed, witnessed, and legally registered months before Daniel's death. Victor snatched the papers from Peter's hand. As he read each page, the color slowly drained from his face. Samuel grabbed another copy, reading it twice before lowering it in disbelief. This can't be possible." "It is," Peter replied. "Daniel legally transferred his shares, business interest, and assets to Grace and the children while he was still alive." No one spoke. For the first time since Daniel's funeral, the people who had mocked Grace had nothing left to say. Peter placed a small brass key on the table. "There's one final instruction." Grace looked at the key. "What does it open?" "A secure deposit box at the bank." The following morning, Grace, Peter, and Mama Ruth arrived at the bank. After confirming Grace's identity, the manager escorted them into a private room and carefully placed a steel deposit box on the table. Grace inhaled deeply. This was Daniel's final gift. She inserted the brass key. With a soft click, the box opened. Inside were 3 carefully preserved items: a seal folder of legal documents, a flash drive, and 1 handwritten letter. Grace unfolded the letter with trembling hands. "My beloved Grace, if you are reading this, then you have already survived the hardest part. I always believed you were far stronger than you realized." A tear slipped down Grace's cheek. "Money can disappear, houses can be taken away, land can change hands, but character, faith, and integrity are treasures no one can ever steal." She smiled through her tears. Peter opened the folder. His eyes widened. "Grace?" She looked up anxiously. "What is it?" "Daniel quietly purchased 200 acres of farmland through the company several years ago." Grace covered her mouth in astonishment. Peter continued. The land has become one of the most valuable agricultural properties in the region. The bank manager checked the valuation documents. The estate is now worth several 100 million naira. Mama Ruth clasped her hands together. Only God could have written such a story. Peter then inserted the flash drive into the bank's computer. A familiar face appeared on the screen. Daniel. His warm smile filled the room. Hello, my love. Grace could no longer hold back her emotions. If you are watching this, then I know you've been through unimaginable pain. I wish I could stand beside you one more time, but if I can't, then let these words stay with you. I know what some members of my family are capable of. That's why I prepared everything long before today. I didn't leave you wealth because I feared poverty. I left you protection because I feared greed. He paused, his eyes filled with love. If one day they come asking for help, remember this. Forgiveness does not mean surrendering your peace. You can forgive people and still protect your family. I will always love you. The screen faded to black. No one moved for several moments. Weeks later, news spread throughout the village. Everyone learned that Grace had become the rightful owner of Daniel's business interest and valuable farmland. The same people who had watched her walk away in the rain now spoke of her courage and resilience. Then, one quiet afternoon, 3 familiar figures appeared at the gate of her new home. Mama Agnes, Victor, and Samuel. Time had humbled them. Their business had collapsed, debt had consumed everything they owned. As Grace stepped onto the veranda, none of them could meet her eyes. Slowly, Mama Agnes knelt. My daughter, please forgive us. Victor lowered his head. Greed blinded us. Samuel's voice trembled. We have lost everything. Grace looked at them in silence. For a moment, memories flooded back. The rain, the hunger, her children's tears, the night they were left nowhere to go. She took a slow breath. I forgive you. All 3 looked up in disbelief. But forgiveness does not erase consequences. She spoke gently but firmly. My children deserve the future Daniel worked hard for. I will never give away what belongs to them. After a brief pause, she continued, I will help you rebuild your lives. Peter smiled quietly. Mama Ruth wiped away tears of joy. Grace arranged modest financial assistance and connected them with honest work, while making it clear that her family's future would always come first. As they turned to leave, Mama Agnes looked back one final time. I finally understand why my son loved you so much. Grace looked toward the evening sky and whispered, Thank you, Daniel. A gentle breeze rustled through the trees as though carrying his memory across the field he had worked hard to protect. For the first time since she stood beside his grave, Grace felt a deep and lasting peace. She realized that Daniel's greatest gift had never been his wealth. It was his unwavering love, his wisdom, and the courage he planted in her heart. Because, in the end, the truth always finds its way into the light.